Metallica, a household name, one of the big four in thrash and an establishment in metal and icons to millions of musicians around the world for 40 plus years. Through the many ups and downs, fan favorite albums and backlash, Metallica has seen it all and always been seen at the top, regardless of circumstances. This week, Metallica is releasing 72 Seasons, the 11th new studio LP and first new album since 2016's Hardwired to Self-Destruct. To many, Metallica is the best metal band ever. Even if that's debatable, Metallica is one of my favorite bands. So after 40 years of Metallica, we have a fair question to ask. Is Metallica overrated? Brief history, as there is way too much to cover and I don't want this video an hour long. Metallica formed by James and Lars in the Bay Area, where San Francisco is still considered home base. The band would later enlist Cliff Burton and Dave Mustaine in the early 80s. After getting noticed and signed to Megaforce Records, the band planned to travel to New York to record their debut LP, in which they realized an issue with Dave Mustaine's substance abuse and violent behavior before the recording. They gave him the boot and Mustaine was sent on a bus back to California, who would eventually form Megadeth. After hiring Kirk Hammett from Exodus, Metallica would go from playing in a garage to playing in arenas in short order as the 80s saw the birth of metal legends. In this decade, the band was absolutely untouchable. It was in 1986 on a tour in Europe that a tragic accident led to the loss of Cliff Burton at the age of 24. This was as tragic as it gets for any band, let alone one of the biggest metal bands in the world. Metallica would eventually pick up the pieces and find a new bassist with Jason Newsted, but not before massive hazing and controversial treatment from Lars with removing bass tracks and recordings. That did not stop the band's massive success, however. The band would continue to sell with the change in tone in the 90s, sold-out stadiums, worldwide tours, Grammys galore, and becoming music icons. Even with a change in tone drifting from thrash metal to mainstream rock, Metallica stayed at the highest level possible. It was in the early 2000s that Metallica started to come unraveled. Well explained in the documentary Some Kind of Monster, the band experienced massive delays, inner frustration and creative arguments, rehab visits, and the departure of Jason Newsted, who had had enough. The band would then release Saint Anger to mostly critical panning. Metallica to this day tries to defend it as the band pushing through the pain to make something, and would eventually hire Rob Trujillo of suicidal tendencies to push through the rest of the 2000s. As time went on, many Metallica projects failed to land, including the Through the Never concert film, which lost a lot of money, and the Lou Reed album Lulu, featuring Metallica on album and on tour, which occupied over 2 years. The 2010s were slow for Metallica until 2016 with the release of Hardwired to Self-Destruct, which further proved the band still had millions of fans to support, and this continued into the 2020s. Now, post-pandemic, the band is about to embark on a massive stadium tour, headline festivals, and release 72 seasons. That was as brief as I can make everything. If you want more on this, I made a YouTube video talking about Some Kind of Monster, which you can check in the YouTube card and in the video description. Also, there are roughly 1,000 or more videos talking about the Metallica history, along with TV shows like Behind the Music. You can check out a link to that in the YouTube card as well. In 1983, when Kill 'Em All was released, thrash metal changed in the United States, and a young babyface band took the spotlight as a force in metal. This was the raw playing sound that metalheads loved in the 80s, while setting up a great base to launch from. Seek and Destroy, classic covers, Kill 'Em All was an amazing debut throughout. The music evolved the following year with Ride the Lightning, which proved Metallica were not one-hit wonders. The sophomore slough meant nothing to Metallica, as the songs For Whom the Bell Tolls and Creeping Death became instant classics and shot Metallica to the forefront of massive crowds. 2 years later, Master of Puppets was released in 1986, and Metallica had permanently cemented their name as legends. In less than 5 years, the band was going multiple times platinum and selling out huge tours, while the title track and Battery became metal national anthems around the world. Even after the turmoil, the streak of amazing albums continued in 1988 with And Justice for All. One became the classic air guitar anthem across the country and beyond. Metallica was established as the biggest metal act in the world and had the unthinkable 4-album run that every group dreams of. Wild to think about just how much Metallica went through at a young age and how much amazing music they produced in less than 10 years, most of which still holds up as legendary. This is peak Metallica. This is the reason millions of fans still cling on to the name, and the reason the name Metallica has such value, because of the output in this decade. Metallica helped define thrash and metal in general through the 80s. In the early 90s, when grunge was starting to become the next big thing, Metallica had decided to shift gears. Less thrash and more mainstream hard rock, haircuts and photo shoots included. Normally this would be a death sentence for a metal band, and while there were naysayers, this became Metallica's best-selling album with some of the most iconic Metallica songs featured on the Black Album. Say what you want about the style change, but charting success, diamond certifications, endless awards, massive singles, Metallica's Black Album was as big as you can get. From Enter Sandman to Nothing Else Matters, and one of my favorites, Holier Than Thou, Metallica proved they can adapt and still succeed. At this point in the 90s, Metallica still were the stadium-dominating massive name in heavy music with 5 albums with nothing but success. This is when it starts to change for a bit, though. After several years with a lot of history and fame, Metallica strayed further away from the thrash roots with the following 2 albums, Load and Reload. This was where fans started questioning Metallica's choices. Metallica was now the radio-friendly rock band riding in limos and posing on red carpets. Load and Reload were singles-driven albums. They were not up to the standard of the Black Album even, and far removed from the thrashy 80s output. I'd be lying if I said I thought they were flat-out unlistenable, but I admit they are completely forgettable. It's worth pointing out that at the end of the 90s, Metallica made some steps forward with an impressive covers double album with Garage Inc. in 98 and the fantastic S&M Live album at the very end of 1999. Both of these were solid entries away from the main discography. In the 90s, Metallica saw themselves become superstars through all music and outgrow genres. Sales continued to be enormous, and although the music was not as beloved as the previous decade, the Black Album is still cherished and S&M is beloved. So, smooth sailing from here, right?
Just real confusing sound.
It's just jacking the vocals all up.
And the guitar, it's a little stock.
It doesn't.
I think it's stock. Which part of that is unclear to you? I think it sounds stock to my ears.
No, when you say, you're telling me what to play right now.
The start of the new century was rough professionally and musically. The band was concerned for the future of Metallica sound, and that was evident in the now infamous Saint Anger. I've talked about this album at length, and it's worth pointing out that even Metallica knows the majority of listeners do not love it. Whether it's endless repetition, awkward lyrics, or off-putting drum work, Saint Anger was a successful mess that definitely knocked Metallica down in the public eye. I'll bring it up again, that growing up in St. Louis and listening to 105.7 The Point, the afternoon DJ played the isolated drum track Too Frantic on the air. It was so bad that FM rock stations were taking time just to laugh at it on the air and point out how rough it sounded. Along with health scares and other issues for the group in the 2000s, the band was struggling but still pushed through. In 2006, Bob Rock was no longer the producer for Metallica, and Rick Rubin would enter for Death Magnetic in 2008. This was a step up from Saint Anger, but still falling short for the heyday of 1983 to 1993. I know some people have issues with the production style for Death Magnetic, but I do feel there are songs that work well along with tracks that stand out live. If anything, I feel this is what should have been the album after the Black Album. It would have been received much better and not been as divisive as Load and Reload. After a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction and Big Four concert, Metallica seemed to have finally come out of the decade still standing. Smooth sailing from here, right?
I am the table!
Enter Lou Reed and Lulu. To this day, I can't believe how much time and effort Metallica and Lou Reed put into this album writing, recording, and touring for something that is truly universally laughed at. This is not a knock on Reed or Metallica's talent either. It's a knock at the final product. It's not good. Lou Reed was past his prime, unfortunately, and I do see this as more of a Lou Reed album, but Metallica is there every step of the way, so yeah, it's kind of hard to disassociate. Along with that business venture, Metallica jumped onto the concert film bandwagon with the 3D Through the Never, which was released in 2013. It was a massive production but misguided as to include a young fan narrative interjecting through the band's amazing stage spectacle. It could have been great, but it was not. It also lost a lot of money as it bombed in box offices worldwide. Metallica needed a rebound big time, and after 8 years since the previous Metallica album, Hardwired to Self-Destruct finally saw the light of day in 2016. Singles were given heavy rotation on FM and satellite radio, it instantly went to #1 on Billboard, and it proved that the band did have a decent album this late in the game. I stand by that Hardwired, just like Death Magnetic, are fine. There are good songs on both. The only issue is that Kirk Hammett had lost his cell phone with hundreds of riff ideas saved during the recording process of Hardwired, so the album had little Kirk influence. It shows as there is a good amount of repetition on the album, like many other later Metallica albums. You see the problem? And now we get to present day, post-lockdown, and 72 Seasons is about to come out. Teased by 4 singles over the last 6 months, Metallica are planning to take the 2020s by storm the best way they know how. Massive stadium tours and a big album trying to prove they are still on top. 72 Seasons comes out the week that I'm posting this video, and I'll review it and give my thoughts after its release, but it's worth pointing out that the singles, while not terrible, don't do that much Metallica has already accomplished. Lots of jam sessions and repetition, but at least that's how we get some better Kirk solos. That means something. There is something to be said about the impact that Metallica had on the future of heavy music. Once Metallica made it big in the 80s, the inspiration for many guitarists, singers, etc. increased exponentially. Teenagers wanted to be like Metallica, and other bands at the time wished they were Metallica. Even to this day, thousands of artists claim Metallica albums as a massive inspiration. Metallica is one of the best-selling artists in the world ever, and the number of albums sold over the years throughout the world, in fact, is not going to be beat anytime soon with the age of streaming. For all their ups and downs, Metallica is one of the most successful bands ever, both in music and in business. All that being said, I put the question on the YouTube community page. With almost 7,000 votes as the time I take these stats, 62% of people say that Metallica is not overrated. There were also over 100 comments on the post because many people have a lot to say about Metallica being overrated or not. The poll stretched to subscribers and non-subscribers as well, so I do feel that many votes on a simple question like this is a good representation of how people feel without digging too deep. Whether it's a toxic diehard fan base or a casual listener who knows the radio singles, Metallica is still known by the public. People have an opinion. As for my personal response to the question, is Metallica overrated? Yeah, a little bit. Angry misspelled incel comments incoming in 5, 4. Hear me out on this, and this is where you need to understand for my opinion to make sense. Being overrated does not automatically mean you are bad. Metallica are great. They've put out amazing albums, much of their music is legendary, and they are still a live force in music today. Metallica is overrated because they are treated by many as perfect in metal and cannot possibly do anything wrong. Anytime Metallica hints at something new, metal fans stop everything they're doing just to check it out. Metallica diehards, which you'll see in the comments section, will defend anything from the group. Even the mainstream viewpoint sees Metallica as the top of the mountain for any metal group. The rough Metallica albums are still laughed at and ignored, but everyone still treats the group as the best ever in heavy music. If any other band had the success to failure ratio that Metallica had in album reception, they would not be treated as well. Metallica are slightly overrated because after the amazing first decade plus the group had, it's set in stone that Metallica can never do any wrong, and everything from the group will always be a big deal. Until it's not. Until we hear a new album and it's always looked at with either rose-tinted glasses or it's passed off as not being as good as the 80s material. James Hetfield even said in an interview, "I know individually we're all really average players, but when you put us together, something happens. Think of the band that millions have tattooed the logo onto their body, having the singers say they are average. Whether you agree or not, the overall public sees them as legendary when Hetfield doesn't even see it that way." So many people hold Metallica to be the be-all end-all for metal when there are many bands doing amazing things that don't get a shred of the credit or attention that Metallica has, even when Metallica puts out something that is repetitive or not up to par with how their name value is viewed. Metallica is still one of my favorite bands. They put out some of the best albums in metal ever with Master of Puppets and Ride the Lightning. That does not make them perfect, which many music lovers and especially Metallica fanatics see them as. That's a lot of people. So yeah, Metallica is slightly overrated. I can't wait for all the ad hominem attacks in the comment section on this video. And that was a look at Metallica and if they're overrated or not. Do you think the band is overrated? Leave a comment and let everyone know. Big thanks to my YouTube members and patrons, and special thanks to Chris Doman and Dom Noble. You can have a say in upcoming videos, get weekly new music playlists, and see videos early by supporting Rocked on Patreon and through a YouTube membership. Click the join button below or the link in the video description on how you can support the channel. Please subscribe and ring the bell to get notified of upcoming videos, and you can keep up to date with Rocked on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. It's weird defending a band who is one of the biggest names in music ever and saying they're slightly overrated. Making this video was a confusing experience.